if I picked up on some loose threads. As I was coming into the building, I was approached by a young lady who wanted really a clarification of something that I had said last week, and I think maybe I ought to do some clarification before I move on. And then there is another request that was made in regard to black women in the Bible, and I thought maybe that I would do something in advance before I go into the lecture at the point where I left off last week. If I remember correctly, what the young lady raised as a question that she wanted clarified, it had to do with whether or not I said that Ham was the father of black people. Now, in the reply that I'm going to give, it may be very well that some of you will take offense at the way I'm going to answer the question. Well, not the way I'm going to answer it, but what I'm going to say in giving the answer. And I'm reminded of a seminar that was held in Chicago on last February 4th on the black presence in the Bible. And I referred to Noah and Ham, Shem, and Japheth as being eponymous ancestors of three different groups of people. And there was a lady who got up and she had me to understand that she couldn't accept anything that had to do with eponymous, whatever eponymous meant, and that she believed that the Bible was literally, historically true in every word, that when she was reading her Bible, everything she read represented actual historical persons and events. So there may be some of you who believe that, and that's what we have been, most of us, brought up to believe, that when we're reading anything in the Bible, we are reading all the time about actual historical persons and actual historical events, without realizing that the Bible is composed of many kinds of literature. You've got, in the first place, prose, you've got poetry, and you know that you don't interpret poetry the same way you do prose. You've got fables, you have got history, you've got legend, you've got saga, you've got love songs, and on, many different kinds of literature. And you interpret literature according to its kind. Often when I have been discussing a point such as this, I have referred to what I think is the 9th chapter of the book of Judges, in which you've got a story in which the trees want a king. And they form a delegation to go around to the cedar of Lebanon, to the olive tree, to different plants, until finally they come to an old briar bush, and they ask each one of these to be king, and they are refused until they get to the old bramble bush, and he says, well, yes, I'll be honored to be your king. Now, whenever we read a story in which animals and inanimate objects act and talk like human beings, we call it what? A fable. Well, now, just because you're reading it in the Bible doesn't mean it has to be history there. But my late father-in-law believed, yes, at one time in Bible times, as he had put it, trees were able to walk and they were able to talk and so on. So now that's one thing that I would have clear. Now, up until a certain point in our Western civilization, we took the Bible to be the only history of mankind. And we took the story that the ancient Hebrew writers wrote on the basis of their knowledge, which, as far as the world is concerned, took in only a little bit more than this map. Now, this map has got lands of the Bible today. The lands of the Bible go all the way from India in the east to Spain on the west, and then down to Ethiopia here, and up here into Europe. That was the Bible world, and that's all the ancient biblical writers knew about the world. They knew nothing about the Western Hemisphere, or even Lower Africa and so on. And we've got to take what we learn in school and put it all together so that we can evaluate what we're reading. Well, this is the world that the Bible writers knew about. And in that world, they saw three different groups of people. Japhites, they call them, Semites, and Hamites. And so, as ancient people do, Where did they come from? So you come up with what you may even think is history, attributing all mankind to one ancestor who was Noah, who had 3 sons, and one of them was Ham, one was Shem, and one was Japheth. Now that's a good explanation as far as it goes, but now, what do you think about the origin of mankind today? Last week, if I remember correctly, there was a lady who asked me about the color of Noah and Mrs. Noah. Did that happen here? And I told you how, up until just before the Civil War, white people who did all the thinking, or at least did all the talking about what the Bible meant, thought that Adam and Eve were white, that Noah and Mrs. Noah were white. Until finally Josiah Priest came up and said, no, white people have been wrong, and he was white. Adam and Eve were red. Everybody up until Noah and Mrs. Noah, including them, was red. And he proved it on the basis of the Hebrew word for Adam and for red. And that black folks and white folks came from a miracle that God performed in the womb of Mrs. Noah. Before that, there were no white folks, no black folks. Well, I mean, if you're going to take all of this to be history, that's not a bad answer. Not bad at all. Now, today, on the basis of what you've been learning ever since kindergarten, mankind didn't come into existence, the different races, in that manner. But that is tradition, and the one thing, black folks as well as white folks have always believed on the basis of the Bible that black folks are descendants of Ham. And so last week I put on the board those 4 descendants of Ham: Cush, which is Ethiopia; Mitzrayim, which is Egypt; Phut, which is perhaps Libya, if not Somaliland; and the land of Canaan. That was the Hebrew explanation. But that's not what you get out of your studies today. Where mankind originally was one, originating in Africa, was black, and that other races, the Mongoloids and the Caucasoids, are offshoots from an original black race. But you see, that's accepted in scientific circles today. And a year ago again, the cover of Newsweek had the original Adam and Eve black. I hope that that sort of explains, although some of you will continue to believe that when you read about Noah and the 3 sons, you're reading about actual historical events. Those were the views of the ancient Hebrew biblical writers. Other people had their ideas also. Now, for fear that time is going to run out on us, and I won't get to emphasize black women in antiquity, let's just go through what I did last week, starting with the first black woman that we put on the board, and then go all the way up to Jesus, and then you will have that for whatever reason you want it. But we started off assuming that Abraham and all of his folks originally were white. They no sooner get into the land of Canaan, which is here, than a famine drives them to Egypt, which we've defined as being made up of black folks. And there Abraham got a maid by the name of Hagar. So she would be the first one of these black women with whom we had contact. And then Hagar got for her son Ishmael, an Egyptian wife. We don't know what her name was, but it would be Ishmael's wife. As Kedar, which means exceedingly black. Then in the 38th chapter of the book of Genesis, we came up with a lady whose name is Bathsheba. She is not to be mistaken for Bathsheba, but she is the daughter of a man named Shua, and she marries Judah. And they have 3 sons, and the oldest boy marries a girl named Tamar. And we paid particular attention to Tamar because she, along with another lady who's going to get into the picture by the name of Rahab the harlot, is going to be an ancestress of Jesus Christ. And of course you read about these 2 women not only in Genesis and in Joshua, but in Luke and in Matthew in the New Testament. You have the genealogy of Jesus that traces his ancestry back through these 2 women. So that wherever you're reading about these folks, you are reading about black people. or black women. And then after we had left Rahab, we went on, and it may be we haven't gotten there yet, but anyway, we'll deal with Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. Did we look at her last week? Oh, well, then we'll be coming to her. And then also we have got the beautiful young lady, the most beautiful woman who lived in all the land of Israel, by the name of Abishag, the Shunammite. And then we have got the Queen of Sheba. And then we have got Solomon's Egyptian princess. And then when you get over into the history of the two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, you have got some women who enter into the picture, and one of them is Jezebel. And just as we used to refer to ourselves as Aunt Hagar's children, it used to be when we ran into a bad woman in the community, we referred to her as Jezebel. Now, Jezebel had a daughter who was a spitting image of the mother. In fact, if you looked at them, you couldn't tell them apart. Does anybody know what Jezebel's daughter was named? Spitting image of her mother. Well, her name is Athaliah. Athaliah. Now, most of the persons we're going to have after this in the Bible, as far as black personalities are concerned, are going to be men. However, you know, I told you that a lot of things that people believe is in the Bible, a lot of things that we believe are in the Bible are not in there. Then where do they come from? And I said that they come from the Talmud and what are called midrashim. These are commentaries on passages in the Bible by the rabbis, and the rabbis make up all kinds of stories, like the Ham stories. And according to the rabbis, Rahab married Joshua, and they became the ancestors of three outstanding persons in the Old Testament. One of them was Jeremiah. Now, this isn't in the Bible. This is some of their tales. And another one was Huldah. Does anybody know who Huldah was? You women like to study about female personalities in the Bible. Somebody in here ought to know who Huldah was. Oftentimes, women play a more important part than men. But apparently, even the women don't pay attention to this. But you read in 2 Kings about King Josiah, who was having the temple repaired. And in the course of the repairs of the temple, a book was found. And nobody knew what that book was. Now, living at that time was Jeremiah, a male prophet, but they didn't take it to him. In addition, there was a prophet who had begun to prophesy at the same time Jeremiah had, and he was black. Does anybody know who the black prophet living in the days of Jeremiah might have been? Anybody remember from previous times? A black prophet called to preach the same year Jeremiah was. His name was Zephaniah. So you've got Zephaniah and you've got Jeremiah, but they didn't go to the men. They went to Huldah, the prophetess. So you look that up in your Bible, and if that's the case, then being a descendant of Rahab, she would have to be included among these women. That's on the basis of the tales that the rabbis told. Then, of course, when we get into the New Testament, you've got such persons as Mary and the whole family of Jesus, as far as the women are concerned. Now, I know that someone will ask the question, well, now, why don't you have Ruth in there? But Ruth is a Moabitess. She's not a Cushite. She's not an Egyptian, not Canaanite, and she's not a Footite. So that Ruth, although was to be sure, she's an ancestress of Jesus. You get that in the book of Ruth. But that doesn't mean that she's to be included among these women here. Are there any questions further to ask about either the Ham as the father of black folks or these black women in the in the Bible?
Where does Mary and the whole family come from?
Here is Mary, and when you get to Luke and Matthew, you get, in one case, Jesus' ancestry through Joseph. You get it through Mary, but they belong to the same family. Both of them are of the house and lineage of David. So when you go tracing this back, you always have to come to this woman and to this one. So that, Tamar has the son Perez, and you're going to get Obed, Jesse, David, and right on through, so that there is where you get not only the family of Mary, but the family of Joseph, as being a black family on the basis of our definitions of last week. All right, any other questions or comments before we go ahead? Well, all right, it appears that last week we got as far as Solomon. I had been talking about David, apparently, so we just looked at David's ancestry, going all the way back to Judah and Tamar. And so you follow through Obed, which is in Ruth, then Jesse, then Jesus. And I indicated the last time that I gave lectures here that if you haven't done it, you ought to go to the library just to look at 3 huge volumes that have been produced within the last 15 years entitled The Image of the Black in Western Art. And in these volumes you have got sculpture, you've got paintings, you've got tapestries of all kinds depicting black people in Western art ever since the Egyptian Empire, going all the way back to 3,000 years before Jesus. And when it comes to the Middle Ages, in some of the churches, on tapestry, in stained glass windows and all, you have what is known as the tree of Jesse. Jesse, the father of David. And always in the trees, you've got one of these pictured as black. Well, again, you don't come up with black folks in a family tree without some black ancestors there. And in a case like this, not only ought they have one black, all of them ought to be. Now, most interestingly, oftentimes that one is indicated as being Uzziah. But I'm surprised that instead of it being Uzziah, it should be Hezekiah. Now, even before the Civil War, in fact, one of the first books that was ever published in this country by a black man was by Arthur B. Lewis, and it is entitled Light and Truth. Now, if you go to the Woodruff Library, you may find 10 copies of that, but the books are all falling apart and they haven't been taken care of. But anyway, those old black folks before the Civil War always thought that Isaiah was black. Why would they get the idea that Isaiah was black? It was because he was supposed to be a relative of King Hezekiah. Now remember that in the kingdom of Judah, there was only one dynasty. All the kings belonged to the same family, and that was the family of David. So if David is black in any sense, or if Solomon is black, as we're going to get into it, not only one, but all of them would be this. But anyway, why Hezekiah instead of Uzziah? It's because Isaiah was supposed to be a relative of Hezekiah, but when we get to Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 1, we're going to learn or see that Zephaniah's father's name was Cushi, and Cushi means what? The Ethiopian. And the ancestry is traced all the way back to somebody by that name. Now, it's very interesting to get your Bible, commentaries, dictionaries, encyclopedia, and so on, and half of them will say, well, it's King Hezekiah. Some, just because he's black, don't want that to be so, so they'll say that it was some other Hezekiah. But so much for that. Now, leaving David and coming to Solomon, if you ask somebody to name black persons in the Bible about whom they already know, almost invariably in a group such as this, someone would come up with Solomon. And you ask them, well, now, where do you get that? And they will say, well, I get it from the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 5. I am black and beautiful. But again, that's not a man talking, that's a young lady who's doing the talking, and Solomon is a man. So that it wouldn't be quite right to associate that. But then on the basis of Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, and who is she? She is the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And as you read about the divisions of the Canaanites who were supposed to be black, the Hittites are just one of those groups. So Solomon is black through his mother Bathsheba. But in addition to that, as we've seen, he is black also through his grandfather and his father. If you want to get the ancestry there, he's of the house and lineage of David. That is Solomon. And that takes care of his mother Bathsheba, of whom we know so very well. And did I put the name? Yeah, I know I did. Abishag on the board there a minute ago. Who is or was Abishag? If you will look in the Encyclopedia Britannica that came out in 1964 and look under that name, you will see an article done there by a fellow named Copher. But but anyway, I think all of you, or at least some of you, because you've read your Bible, know about Abishag. But when you get to the latter part of 2 Samuel and get into 1 Kings, David is an old man who is very senile. And his children are wondering how much longer he's going to live. In fact, Bathsheba is interested also because she wants her son Solomon to get the throne. Now, suppose you've got an old man my age, and you're trying to figure out how much longer is he going to last. How would you go about finding out? Well, you don't need to answer that. I take you off the hook, but I can tell you what they did. And you read this in the Bible. Yes, David was a man after God's own heart. The Bible tells you that. But one of his troubles was he's just always crazy about women. In a way, he was worse than Solomon. So in the case of David, if you get an attractive young girl, old women and middle-aged women are no longer of much interest. Yeah. And I refer you to the Bible for this. I'm not making this up. So they sent throughout the land of Egypt, Israel, to find the loveliest young lady they could find. And it was a Shunammite, Abishag. Put her in the bed with David and looked through peepholes to see what would happen. Well, if it's somebody my age and whatnot, you don't need to peep. But anyway, they peeped. And when they saw that David had no interest, they knew he was ready to go. You know, one reason you don't find the Bible more interesting than you do is you don't read it. But if you read it, and that gave them the notice that David is ready to die, then the children start fighting over the throne. And then you get these nasty stories of how Bathsheba and Nathan cooked up a plot And the boy who was to get the throne was named Adonijah. And he had his following, and they crowned Adonijah king, and then Bathsheba and Nathan went in and said to David in his senility, well, now, you know, David, you said you were going to give the throne to my son Solomon. That's Bathsheba doing the talking. And David says, yes, I do remember. And Adonijah is chased off the throne, and Solomon is crowned in his stead. But then read 2 Samuel chapter 9, through chapter 20. And you get all these bad stories about David and the fighting that is going on. How one of the boys, Amnon, rapes his half-sister Tamar. Not the Tamar we had on the board, but his half-sister. Absalom is her whole brother. He kills that half-brother, and on and on. These are the kinds of things that happened in connection with their deciding that David was ready to go. Well, all right, now here is Abishag. And we can't think of Abishag without thinking about the maiden in the Song of Solomon. Who is that young lady in the Song of Songs? I thought that we had dealt with that last week, but apparently this was in another group. We did talk about it. And someone said it was the Queen of Sheba? Yeah, I thought that we had done that, the Queen of Sheba. And some think it was Abishag. And some think it was the wife that Moses married, Moses' Cushite wife. Oh, by the way, I should have included her among the black women in the Bible. Moses' Cushite wife, Numbers chapter 12, verse 1. And then some think that it was Solomon's Egyptian princess. So you get all of these answers. But because she's a Shunammite, some think that it is this girl here. It would hardly be a love song to Moses' Cushite wife. It could be to the Queen of Sheba, and it could be Solomon's Egyptian princess. I have been particularly interested in her being Solomon's Egyptian princess because one of the church fathers living about 350 AD, and I think I made mention of this last week, indicated why Solomon had written the song praising her, and it was to keep his father from getting mad because she didn't get the kind of reception she should have gotten by the young ladies in Jerusalem. But there is the maid in the Song of Songs, whatever her identity might have been. And then doing this on a chronological basis, we've got the Queen of Sheba. Now, most of the commentaries and dictionaries and encyclopedia are going to have the Queen of Sheba coming from southwest Arabia. But further investigation shows that the Queen of Sheba ruled over a kingdom that stretched across the Red Sea. It was in Africa and stretched into southwest Arabia. But Josephus, who was a Jewish historian living in the time of Jesus and later, said that she was the queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. And Ethiopia in ancient times lies directly south of Egypt and corresponds to what is now the Sudan. And again, if you get those volumes on the image of the black in Western art, you can get to see the various paintings of the Queen of Sheba throughout the centuries. In some cases, she's depicted as black with blonde hair. In some instances, she's all white. In some, all black. But then in most of those in which she is all black, she is referred to as a temptress who seduced Solomon to worship idol gods. If you read the life of Solomon in 1 Kings chapters 1 through 11, Solomon in his old age was worse than David. And he began to worship idols. And some think that it was the Queen of Sheba who introduced Solomon to the worship of idol gods. Now, on another hand, you've got all kinds of stories relating to the Queen of Sheba in Jewish, in Christian, and in Arabic literature. So we could go on and spend 2 or 3 days just talking about kinds of stories about the Queen of Sheba, how she heard about Solomon and traveled all the way up here to Jerusalem and had an experience that was beyond anything that she had ever dreamed of. But one of the main things about the Queen of Sheba, and that was very common up until 1974, had to do with Solomon's relationship with her. And I gave Dr. Barbara 4 or 5 years ago a painting of the Ethiopian national epic. That is the story of the relationship between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, how she came to Jerusalem, how he seduced her. She became the father of the first king of that Solomonic or Davidic line, and his name was Menelik I. And up until that dynasty was overthrown in 1974, Haile Selassie and others traced their ancestry all the way back to that episode between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Are there any questions that anybody wants to raise now through any of this as we've gone along? Or any comments? Have I gone too fast or?